All right, welcome to what is hopefully, our plan is this will be the final extended recording session that we have in this series. So what we've been doing, and some of you probably caught on to what we do, we record for what seems like an eternity, hours at a time, and then we break it up into several sections. So there probably won't be a time for us to say, "Oh, here's the final one." That what you're watching right now is probably going to be broken up into 2 or 3 different videos. But what we've been doing is listening to Alan Fox as he has taken the teachings of Calvinism as he understands them and has put them up to the test of Scripture. And I think what we have discovered and tried to show is that what he's putting forth is not what has historically been known as Calvinism or the doctrines of grace or Reformed theology. And not only that, but what he has put forward, he's not really put up to the test of Scripture. And we encourage, and have encouraged, we want to encourage everybody to continue to study these things. Don't take our word for it. We've tried to add links and stuff to several of the videos to show that what he's saying is not true. What other men have said, he's put words in people's mouths, so on and so forth. So there will be some of those still to come, some readings that you can do, but we want to encourage everybody to continue to read the Scriptures and see if these things are so. Examine the Scriptures. I don't think any of us would say, take our word for it because we're right. We want you to get into the Scriptures yourself. So the last sermon, Yes, Jesus Loves Me, Part 8, home stretch.
Let's do it.
We finished the last session at 15 minutes and 26 seconds. I'm going to play it now at 15 minutes 7 seconds just to make sure that we're not missing any of this
Context.
Yeah, any context, any of this meaty information.
I know for many of us it's hard to comprehend if you've never dealt with a Calvinist or witnessed to them or tried to help them. Or I know it's really hard to comprehend. I want you to hear the verdict of a Protestant General Assembly, speaking for all the churches of the whole nation. Scotland, 1796, they were talking about spreading the gospel, missions. And this was their verdict. This was the verdict of Calvinists about missionaries. They said, quote, highly preposterous. Getting people saved, sending out missionaries. Well, they said that's crazy.
Is this still the quote?
And they still feel the same way.
It's a loose quotation. So if I can remember, I'll post a link on this video. There is actually, it's a part of a larger writing, but a man actually wrote on the, quote, highly preposterous origin of Scottish missions. This quote, highly preposterous, actually got really popular because there are a lot of people who said if you're a Calvinist, you don't believe in missions. And that's not, again, what we have is things taken out of context and twisted. So a little background here, and I've typed some things up just to sort of set the stage. We talked a little bit in one of the last videos about being anachronistic as we think about what missions would have looked like in the 17th and 18th century. We have what's the Joshua Project? Is that the one where they have all the unreached people groups and things?
I think so.
So we can get online and Google, like, where are the people groups? Where do they live? What's the climate? What's the weather there today? They didn't have that back then. So we're talking about the concept of missions. Go into a place where you think there are some people. Maybe there are records of some people, but that's all you know. You don't have anybody that's there to explain, to help you, to make a contact, anything. There was a dispute in these days between natural religion and revealed religion. And I've typed this stuff up. I think these might just be quotes from Wikipedia or something, somewhere on the internet. So, natural theology, I think this is a quote, was such thought about God, the grounds for belief in his existence, the evidence of his character, and so forth, as might be conducted without reference to the Bible. So that's natural theology. What can you learn about God without any revelation whatsoever? Okay? And then there was revealed religion, which is what we take from the Scriptures and learn about God as has been revealed. So the big debate in these early days of what eventually grew into missions efforts was, if we're going to what they called the heathen, which in their mind, these are people that are, for all they know, barely higher than animals in their conception of anything. If we're going to go to them, what do we give them first? If they have no concept of natural religion, now we look back on this, Romans 1 says that all men know. God has clearly revealed himself. So they were, if this is not to justify their thinking, but their thinking was, if they have zero conception of natural religion, like these people, they imagine they're sitting around, with no clothes on, sitting in the dirt, eating one another, that's all they thought of, was these savage pagans. If they have nothing to begin with, can we just show up and preach the gospel, or do we go and build some sort of framework of natural religion to then build the gospel on top of that? That was sort of the dispute. And so as we just heard, the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, which eventually became the Presbyterian Church, they're meeting, and they're talking about missions. Like in one of the last videos, we laughed because these men are meeting to talk about missions. They want to send missionaries. There are there's the London Missionary Society, other various mission societies in the land who are trying to figure out what to do. Questions we never even think about. But that was the dispute. Can we just go to them and preach the gospel, or do we have to lay the groundwork for some kind of revealed religion, or natural religion rather, before preaching the gospel? And if there's this disagreement amongst these various groups, which are all vying for finances to fund the mission efforts, well, then they're going to argue. You want us to pay money for you to go and do what we don't think you ought to be doing in that way. The argument wasn't, should there be missionaries? The argument was, how do we do it? Do we go and give them natural religion first and then revealed? That was the dispute, and that led to this quotation. All right, so I found the quote from this work entitled Highly Preposterous: Origins of Scottish Missions by Gavin White, B.A.B.D., Ph.D. So let me read this very briefly. I'll just read the opening paragraph. In one of the most widely used church history texts of the present day, it is stated that in the 1796 General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, quote, passed a motion that to spread abroad the knowledge of the gospel among barbarous and heathen nations seems highly preposterous, insofar as it anticipates, it even reverses the order of nature. A recent revision of the same book does make clear that the words quoted were not part of any motion, but that they still give the impression that the General Assembly, or the speaker in question, was opposed to missions. Such an interpretation was held by Hugh Miller, who propagated it first in his paper and later in a book. But Miller was wrong. And then Gavin White goes on to give sort of the historical background. In the 18th century battle against rationalism, the theists had been obliged to protect themselves from arguments based on natural theology by first showing that natural religion was consonant with theism. Only then could they safely move on to revealed religion. You see the debate here between the process of which comes first, natural or revealed religion. That sort of sets up the stage for this exchange at that 1796 General Assembly. The trouble arose through overtures introduced before the General Assembly of 1796 by the synods of Moray and Fife, one to support the new missionary societies. Yes, there were missionary societies. And another actually to take up collections on their behalf. Yes, there were missionary societies. Yes, people were taking up money. Churches were giving money to fund missions. The question was not, ought we be missionaries? The question is, ought we be giving our money to these missionaries who are doing it in a way that we are not real sure about? Here's the longest quote. There's nothing to show clearly that Hamilton, that's Reverend George Hamilton of Gladsmuir, there's nothing to show clearly that Hamilton was opposed to overseas missions. What he did oppose was preaching revealed religion before natural religion. And this is a quote, to spread abroad the knowledge of the gospel among barbarian and heathen nations seems to me highly preposterous, in as far as it anticipates, nay, as it even reverses the order of nature. Men must be polished and refined in their manners before they can be properly enlightened in religious truths. Now, I don't agree with that statement. You need to be able to communicate with them, but that was his view. Not that there ought not to be missions, but how should we go about it? Men must be polished and refined in their manners before they can be properly enlightened in religious truths. Philosophy and learning must, in the nature of things, take precedence. End quote. Having spoken against the policies of the three societies as he understood them, he then declared that he wanted missionaries, quote, to endeavor to find the people whose state of society is by nature fitted for Christianity's reception, or fitted to render it the blessing for which it was intended, end quote. He then asserted that, with some degree of truth, that the Apostle Paul preached, not to naked savages, but to the inhabitants of cultured cities. Had he stopped there, he would have better served his cause and his own reputation. But Hamilton had been trained for the English bar, and he could not resist a legal quibble about whether ministers who took up collections for missions did not lay themselves open to, quote, penal prosecution. This last speculation lost him not only the sympathy of his hearers, but also the thread of his argument. It did gain him the attention of Dr. Erskine, who made him back down on collections, disassociated Protestant from Roman Catholic missions, and then called out, quote, moderator, racks me with the Bible, end quote. With the Bible in hand, he countered Hamilton's argument by a quotation from St. Paul. I am debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians. The very fact that there are writings clarifying this phrase highly preposterous shows that it has been taken, and even the quote I'll include there shows that the train of how one man took this quote and then put it in a history book, and it's been used from that point on to say the Calvinists never believed in missions. But it's just not the case. There were missionary societies getting together to discuss how should missions be done, and that's where that quotation was from. I meant to print that off and I didn't. I'm sorry. But do Calvinists believe in missions? And we're going to talk some more about this. Absolutely.
Baptists are not Protestant. I hope you know that. I'll have to preach on that sometime, but we are not Protestant.
If you're not Protestant, then you're Roman Catholic. I mean,
or Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, or
we'll give you that one.
To be a Protestant means that you say that the Roman Catholic Church is not a true church. So they say we're a church, and we say I protest that statement. That's not true. It's not about particular denominational lines. I think we've talked about before how there seems to be this idea that being a Protestant means you physically left the Roman Catholic Church and came out of it personally. But that's not the case. There were a lot of people who were protesting Rome. So if you believe that the Roman Catholic Church is a true church, then you're a Roman Catholic. And if you don't, then you're protesting the Roman Catholic Church.
By no means. I used to get a little newsletter. It's called The Battle Cry. It's sent all over the world, and it said The Battle Cry, and it was they're trying to sell Christian materials. And underneath the title of The Battle Cry, it said, for the Bible-believing Protestants of the world. And I'd read that, and that bothered me, because I never met a Bible-believing Protestant. So I wrote to the man that owned the business. And I said to him, sir, I've never met a Bible-believing Protestant. I've never met a Protestant who believed in immersion.
You believe in immersion, Austin?
Yep.
What about you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
Never met one who believed in the rapture.
Nope.
Alex, do you believe in the rapture?
No.
That's not a Protestant distinctive.
Well, I believe in the rapture, but it's not what he means. the rapture.
It's funny. To me, it's funny what he thinks a Protestant is.
Yeah.
Immersion.
No,
A non-Protestant. Immersion and the rapture. So far.
Distinctives.
Yeah.
The proper
It's a Baptist.
government in the church.
Proper government in
Let's
the church.
talk about proper government in the church. Yeah, shall we?
What is the proper government in the church?
What is? That's a great question, Mr. Fox. Does he have co-elders, do you think?
No, he doesn't.
No co-elders. Okay, so when the apostles went into every church and appointed elders, plural, how are you following their example with your single pastorate, monarchical mini-pope structure that you got going on over there, Mr. Roman Catholic?
He's not a Protestant. We've already determined that.
You're not a Protestant, and you have a pope-like structure within your church, so you must be a quasi-Roman Catholic.
And if a child prays and asks Jesus into their heart, they say the proper words. It's his job to declare that they have been born again, and to baptism in the water.
It's almost like baptismal regeneration. You just replace water with a magical formula of words.
Right. It's very
Sounds
eerie.
Very Roman Catholic.
And I mean, let's really be fair thinking about what he's saying. He's saying Bible believing. And then, so the first three things he brings up is immersion, rapture, and what was the third one?
Church government.
Church government.
Talk about the gospel being this. No.
Yeah, so chapter and verse, please. Show me the verse for immersion. Show me the verse for the rapture, or the verse for church government. And we're talking about things that aren't the. It takes some knowledge of the scriptures to come to these things, and the fact that it's amazing to me how people who you talk to them, they can't tell you again what propitiation means, what sanctification is, what justification is. But yet everyone in these groups unanimously believes these things somehow from the scriptures. But chapter and verse, please. Who can explain to me the doctrine of immersion from the scriptures that goes to your church? If we went to your church and went by and asked all the people in your church who unanimously are applauding you and saying, yeah, we all believe that, who themselves can explain it from the scriptures? I imagine the numbers would be few.
And that's another distinctive of Roman Catholicism. The laity don't know why it's true. They just take the Pope's word for it.
Right. So, if Bible believing, I mean, it really gets under my skin because I know this man was a missionary in a country half the size of North Carolina during a time they call it the Troubles in Northern Ireland, where there's this constant political dispute between Ireland and Northern Ireland. People got killed. It's a war. And one of the Protestant voices during that time was a man named Ian Paisley. Man, he preached at Bob Jones University. He was known fundamentalist. Maybe he took some positions that I would even say are hard line, but he was a known fundamentalist. At the same time, this man is a missionary in Northern Ireland. And again, I don't want to, this is not supposed to be a personal attack, but I find that very strange. It'd be like living in America and not knowing who Donald Trump is. How you can be a missionary in Northern Ireland at the time that this man was a missionary and not know who Ian Paisley was is strange to me. But the whole dispute there, it was very much so. You can't watch the news without you see men standing up and disputing men like the Pope, have not wanting anything to do with men like Billy Graham because he's compromising with Rome. And yet we've heard, and again, that's Ian Paisley, one of the leaders in Northern Ireland. But we've heard from Alan Fox over and over and over that Protestants are Roman Catholics. Protestants don't believe the Bible. It's slanderous, really. And I think it's worth being upset about because it is such a strong attack on brothers, and there's no evidence for it whatsoever. I'm against it.
Yeah, I think it really does. It really does. It's like he lives in his own world, really. So the battle cry. Do you know what the battle cry is? Are you familiar with Chick Tracts?
Yeah.
So the battle cry was the publication. It might have been a quarterly publication or something. May, June. So maybe every other month. The quarterly publication might still be of Chick Publications. Like that was their magazine that they sent out. So his claim is that the battle cry from Chick Publications used to say, for Bible-believing Protestants, but Alan Fox strapped on his armor and went to war and wrote Jack Chick a letter and said, and I've never met a Bible-believing Protestant, etc., etc. And
As a result, they switched.
And as a result, they changed the newsletter. Did we get to the end of the story yet? I want to hear the story out.
Most of them are Calvinists. Most of them don't understand that salvation. I said, I've never met one. I said, I've witnessed to hundreds of them.
No, he's not.
Presbyterians and Methodists and Lutherans and Anglicans and others. I said, I've never met one. And he wrote me back and said, you're right. He said, I'm going to change that to the Bible-believing Christians of the world.
So
Just on the basis of somebody writing to you and saying, I've never met one,
So-
you just throw it all down and say, you're right.
yeah, so Jack Chick read Alan Fox's letter. So I had to research this. So I got a hold of a man named David Daniels, who is the author and researcher for Chick Publications, and I just asked him, we got a guy saying this stuff, is it even true? And he sent me, this guy is a kind of, he's a research nut, kind of like me. So he's sending me pictures of the battle cry, where it did used to say, the Bible-believing Protestants, and then later on was changed. And I said, well, this is, I'm reading here because I printed off the communication. I said, this man claims to have written a letter, and that was why it was changed. You're saying that it was an internal decision. Well, I should read what he said before that. He said, when we changed the format, at least by December 2005, it was changed to Bible-believing Christians. David Daniels. I had to do partly with that because as we reconsidered the heading words, it only included Protestants and did not include Baptists and others who were never Protestants. So this guy obviously agrees with that this mangling of history. But anyway, so he says, I had to do with that. And I said, so you're saying it was an internal decision? His response, yes, because we were also switching from sheet-fed web press, and thus we were redesigning the shape, pages, and look of the battle cry. So we reconsidered all the words of the title banner. And then he's sending me pictures. He sent me a lot more information than I needed.
Did you ask him if they had any recollection of this letter?
Well, he said, end of the conversation, he said, your guy may have sent a letter. I don't know. I don't read those kind of letters unless they were to me. But we used to have a guy in here who would walk into the bookstore and tell everyone he gave the idea for Wise Mary crying. And of course, people here remember the day that Jack hit upon that idea. So whether or not there was a letter or not, this guy who is the author and researcher doesn't have any recollection of that. It was a change made when they were changing the format. I just think this stuff is funny. He's just making up stuff. Like I wrote a letter and they changed it because of his bold stance against the Protestants. It's just lies. I think he lives in a fantasy world. I wrote a letter to Chipper Jones one time when I was in 3rd grade.
Chipper Jones?
Yeah, Chipper Jones. Never heard anything back from him. But it would be like me saying, hey, Chipper, I think you should bat the other way. And he was like, you know what? I think I will.
No, it's like all the kids who write a letter to the president every year.
Yeah.
And then, out of the 1,000 letters that get sent, the president happens to do something that one of the letters recommended, and then they're going to run around saying, see,
Yep.
I wrote him a letter,
Yep.
and they changed it. The president did what I said.
Yeah, and this is Jack Chick, which I don't know him very well. He's dead now, and I might have a hard time saying he's going to be with the Lord. The man was a very strange guy.
Very.
But anyway, that's the battle cry, and then there you have the story of how the heading got changed.
Number 2, Calvinism will kill the sinner.
Oh, so remember that we're talking about the
Yeah.
relationship between Calvinism and handling snakes and how it's deadly. It'll kill the sinner.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
It'll kill the sinner, not sin. Sin doesn't kill the sinner. It's Calvinism that kills the sinner.
You know what Calvinists say to sinners?
Repent.
Well, God might love you. Probably don't. Don't worry about it. Nothing you can do about it. And the sinner walks away thinking, well, that's confusing. But what about John 3:16? It leaves sinners totally unconcerned, totally confused, hopeless. No wonder it causes many people to become atheists and to hate God like
Calvinism causes people to become atheists and to hate God. Not the fact that they were born in Adam,
Right.
but it's Calvinism.
King James said it would. Probably the most Calvinist nation in the world tonight is Scotland, because John Knox came there. He trained under John Calvin, came to Scotland, founded the Presbyterian Church. John Knox, the hero of Scotland, almost a completely Calvinist nation. And if you want to see the fruits of Calvinism, you just go to Scotland. And I was going over there to knock on doors and witness to people with another missionary one time. He said, Brother Allen, you are not prepared for what's getting ready to happen. He said, in Northern Ireland, where you live, everybody's religious. People will tell you, I'm a Christian, and they mean I was baptized as a baby. He said, but this is Scotland. This is the foundation of Calvinism. Everybody here's an atheist. I said, I don't believe it. We knocked on probably 100 doors in Glasgow, the capital. And little old grandmas and mothers with babies in their hands said, we don't believe in God. And if there is a God, we hate God because He hates us. That's Calvinism.
The average percentage of atheists, even in Europe today, which is more secular, is well under 50% of the population. So if he knocked on 100 doors and the vast majority told him they were atheists, he has an amazing way with statistical probability. So I just find that interesting.
Yeah. And it's a straw man fallacy. Same thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to deal with what Calvinism teaches or any of the doctrines of Calvinism. So he's just creating some story because he doesn't want to deal with he doesn't really want to deal with the teachings because he can't.
What does the Bible teach?
Yeah, what does a Calvinist say to a sinner?
I'll tell you. I'm a Calvinist, if you haven't picked up on that at this point in the videos. And I had a wonderful opportunity this week. I teach high school kids, and we went up to a retreat. And I got to spend about 7 or 8 hours just preaching the gospel over the course of different conversations with different students over 3 days. And what I told them was real simple. You're a sinner. You're deserving of hell. The Lord Jesus has come and earned perfect righteousness, and everyone who repents of their sin and puts their faith in Jesus Christ will be saved. That was about it. And then I answered questions. What I didn't tell them was that, God's predestined you to go to hell, so just give up on life. We preach, the same things that Jesus came saying, repent and believe the gospel. Mm-hmm. It's real simple message, and that's exactly what we preach.
And anybody who doesn't do that but still claims to be a Calvinist for whatever reason, they don't know what they're talking about.
Nope.
And I guess we could show a lot of we could give witnesses sermons. I mean, we've got books. There are libraries of sermons of men who would fall into the category of historic Calvinists who begged and pleaded with sinners. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. The most famous sermon probably ever preached in
English.
In English. Second only to the shocking youth message by Paul Washer. But Jonathan Edwards would be what we would call a Calvinist. He believed in the Reformed theology, the doctrines of grace. They pleaded with sinners. So this we're seeing again. This is it's made up nonsense. But Scotland has little old ladies, and they're all atheists and hate God. They don't believe in God, but if he does exist, they hate his guts.
You find the same thing here. You find the same thing in California. You find the same thing in Charlotte. You find the same thing anywhere. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that prove? you're not dealing with the issue at all. You're just creating some other straw man, tearing that down, trying to switch the argument to something else.
Yeah.
And not dealing at all with why it's an unbiblical doctrine. Explain to us from the text why this is not a biblical system from the text. But 8 sermons, he hasn't done that once.
Yeah, and you're saying you're a Bible-believing Christian, but again, you haven't put forth what does the Bible actually say.
Mm-hmm. So we're on Sermon 8 now.
Yeah, it's really kind of just a pathetic thing of just rambling.
And I think I've come to this conclusion too. There's really nothing more intellectually dishonest than saying, well, I'm not a Protestant. I'm not a Calvinist. I'm just a Bible-believing Christian.
That doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. And really what you're saying is, I'm not a Protestant. I'm not a Calvinist. I'm just a Bible-believing Christian who must believe this, 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 and this. You have your own system. As I just said before, the immersion, the rapture, all these different things. You have your own sect, your own denomination. Everybody's glued to it. If you were just simple Bible-believing Christians, which you would find, as we've said in the videos over and over and over, there would be a plethora of different individuals, of simple Bible-believing Christians coming to different conclusions about different things because they're simply reading their Bibles. But you don't have that. You have a unanimous agreement on things that really for 1900 years the rest of the church didn't believe, which is a strange thing.
And we can talk fruit all day long. I mean, look, I can go into churches just like yours and find a huge percentage of people who believe that they're going to heaven because God loves them and they've done their best to be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
That's damnable heresy, according to the Apostle Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It's salvation by law. And yet, the fruit of this kind of preaching, where all we do is rant and yell and occasionally allude to a Bible verse, leaves people not knowing what the Bible actually teaches while claiming to be Bible-believing Christians, and yet turning around and espousing heresy that they think they're going to heaven based upon their own good lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, fruit is not the arbiter. Alleged fruit, your interpretation of fruit, is not the arbiter of what's true and what's not true here. We go to the Scriptures. Mm-hmm. One side does that and exegetes the text. The other yells louder.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah, if you wanted to prove that you were a Bible-believing Christian, pick a book of the Bible, start at verse 1, and preach straight through it. But everything that he does, I mean, I've listened to his sermons, everything that he does tells me he does not believe the Bible.
Right.
He's going to read one verse, make a mention of it, and then just take off.
Right.
And you get his own little mishmash of opinions and thoughts and made up stories and anecdotes. That tells me we've got a man who doesn't believe the Bible. And somehow the fact that you've got atheists in Scotland who say, well, we don't believe in God because he hates us, somehow that's worse than what we have, which is a lot of people who profess to have been saved by a God who can't even change the way that they talk, or the way that they dress, or the music that they listen to. It doesn't even, there's zero real biblical fruit. But since they don't profess to be atheists, well, that's better. But over in Scotland, well, boy, they'll tell you they're atheists, which I don't think that's true either. But you realize there's what has been called practical atheism. People who they won't say it out loud because their pride won't allow them. But everything in their life says, well, I don't believe in that God. Just like Mr. Fox, everything in his ministry says, I don't believe that book. I mean, I'll read a verse of it before I start talking, but I don't believe what it says.
And this thing of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but this thing of,
It's okay.
Cut you off.
you want this thing of Calvinism makes it hard for Christians. Ultimately, that's what he's saying. He's saying that he doesn't like how the Bible puts it. The Bible is not a clear-cut bullet point of every fundamental doctrine that you can just check off. It is a difficult thing to wade through. God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His ways are higher than our ways. people from this camp tend to want to do, and it's very popular, is to take and create their own system and say, well, we don't need the Bible. This is our system, and adhere to this.
Yeah.
Follow this. Check off immersion and the rapture and do all these other things. We don't need the Bible. We have our own fundamental system. We simplified it. It's just the Romans road, and that's the only part of the Bible we need. And that's setting yourself up higher than God, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got the 4 volumes of the fundamentals back there. I'm pretty sure the rapture's not in there.
No.
Because most of it was written by Presbyterians.
Like Calvinists wrote the books whereby where did you take your name from? Yeah.
That's Calvinism. It kills the sinner. Totally unconcerned. I remember talking to some people. They lived across the road from a Presbyterian church.
Okay, so here's his.
Didn't we already hear this?
We're going to get his evangelistic approach. So they live across the street from a Presbyterian church. You know, the Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, Islamic,
Protestant, Islamic.
yeah, Christian killers.
I said, it's easy for you to go to church, about 15 steps and you're in the door. They said, we don't go. We're Calvinists. If God's going to save us, He is. There's nothing we can do about it. And if He's not, there's nothing we can do about it. I said, that's wrong. I said, you seek God and you'll find Him.
That's just a lie. Like, I'm just calling that never happened.
Yeah.
Like, it just didn't. That didn't happen.
You're waiting on Him to drag you in the church and save you in your sleep. You'll die and go to hell with your Calvinism.
And that's true. I mean, if that's what you think, you will die and go to hell.
I've still never met anyone who
But
believes
nobody-
that, even on the internet.
Nobody says that. I mean, we've heard
Nobody
these
says
stories
that.
of well, I go to the Calvinist church down the street. Nobody says that. And we've even been somewhat loose with that language because it's not. People don't do that.
I meet dispensationalist Baptist fundamentalists say even more ridiculous things. I'm knocking on the door just back here. So somebody comes to the door. I don't know. They go to some church around here. The big cloud of marijuana comes out. They say, "Well, we're all Christians here, and we're all sitting around high and fat, and there's beer cans everywhere. We're all Christians. We don't need to go to church." So does that mean that every Baptist fundamentalist, that's the way they act, and that's what they teach in their churches? Absolutely not. This is ridiculous argumentation.
Yeah.
It's
Next, it'll be CBD oil dripping out of the.
yeah.
Out the CBD stores in Taylorsville. Have you seen the signs?
Yeah.
So Calvinism is lethal.
No.
Sin.
It's sin.
Sin.
The problem is the sinfulness of man, enemies and haters of God. I mean, this would be one of those opportunities where he could explain that.
Yes.
But he doesn't, because
No.
the enemy is Calvinism, not sin. The enemy is out there, not here. The enemy is those folks, not us. That's how these sermons tend to go. They have no concept of whether you want to call it total depravity or not. The sinfulness of man. No concept.
Calvinists love to quote the Westminster Confession that says God takes pleasure in the sovereign reprobation of the non-elect.
Okay, so Calvinists love to quote the Westminster, whoever that guy is, that says that God takes pleasure in the sovereign reprobation of sinners. Now, the London Baptist Confession is very similar to the Westminster Confession, except for the parts that make it a Baptist confession. But you can Google the Westminster Confession on a PDF format and just type in pleasure or reprobation or something. What you're going to find is that the Westminster Confession doesn't say that. Nowhere does it say God takes pleasure in the sovereign reprobation of sinners. The closest thing I could find, I won't read from the confession, the closest thing I could find was in the Canons of Dort, Article 15 of Doctrine number 1. And I'll read it for you because truth can always lead to truth, but error can never bring forth truth. So let me just read the truth. What peculiarly tends to illustrate and recommend to us the eternal and unmerited grace of election is the express testimony of sacred Scripture, that not all, but only some are elected, while others are passed by in the eternal decree, whom God, out of his sovereign, most just, irreprehensible, and unchangeable good pleasure, hath decreed to leave in the common misery into which they have willfully plunged themselves, and not to bestow upon them saving faith and the grace of conversion, but permitting them in his just judgment to follow their own ways, at last, for the declaration of his justice, to condemn and perish them forever, not only on account of their unbelief, but also for all their other sins. And this is the decree of reprobation, which by no means makes God the author of sin, parenthesis, the very thought of which is blasphemy, in close parenthesis, but declares him to be an awful, irreprehensible, and that's no E, awful, not awful, like he's terrible, but full of awe, awful, irreprehensible, and righteous judge and avenger thereof. Notice that man is not the victim of God's decree of reprobation.
Rebel.
Man has plunged himself willfully into misery. Now, if you say that God ought to save them, grace is gone.
That's right.
You lay any obligation at God's feet to save anybody, you have no grace. So what you have to say is that if God is going to save any of these folks, it's all of grace. And that's what they're talking about here. But God has decreed that those who are not saved, because they have willfully plunged themselves into misery, because they, on account of their own unbelief and for their own sins, they stay in that state. God has decreed that people who die in that condition will spend eternity in hell. Now, it's interesting that I believe that Mr. Fox would agree with the doctrine of hell, that unregenerate, lost people die and go to hell. Is God going to be surprised at the judgment? Like when the sheep and the goats are separated, all of a sudden he decides, I'm going to send some to hell. No, we've already read in Matthew 25, that's going to happen. He knows it's going to happen. That's a part of his eternal decree, that when justice is served, those who have willfully plunged themselves into misery and unbelief and all their sins, they will spend eternity in hell. That's the decree of reprobation. It's not that God looked at this perfect mass of humanity and said, you know what? I'm going to send some of those losers to hell, and I'm going to pick some other ones for salvation. But that's the canons of Dort. But the Westminster Confession doesn't say that.